Welcome to Party Street. Today we are going to discuss about church and monasticism in medieval Europe. Christianity was a major unifying factor between Eastern and Western Europe before the Arab conquests. But the conquest of North Africa sundered maritime connections between those areas. Increasingly, the Byzantine Church differed in language, practices, and liturgy from the Western Church. The Eastern Church used Greek instead of the Western Latin. Theological and political differences emerged, and by the early and middle 8th century, issues such as iconoclasm, clerical marriage, and state control of the church had widened to the extent that the cultural and religious differences were greater than the similarities. The formal break, known as the East-West Schism, came in 1054 when the papacy and the Patriarchy of Constantinople clashed over papal supremacy and excommunicated each other, which led to the division of Christianity into two churches. The Western branch became the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern branch the Eastern Orthodox Church. The ecclesiastical structure of the Roman Empire survived the movements and invasions in the West mostly intact, but the papacy was little regarded and few of the Western bishops looked to the Bishop of Rome for religious or political leadership. Many of the popes prior to 750 were more concerned with Byzantine affairs and Eastern theological controversies. The register or archived copies of the letters of Pope Gregory the Great survived, and of those more than 850 letters, the vast majority were concerned with affairs in Italy or Constantinople. The only part of Western Europe where the papacy had influence was Britain, where Gregory had sent the Gregorian mission in 597 to convert the Anglo-Saxons to Christianity. Irish missionaries were most active in Western Europe between the 5th and the 7th centuries, going first to England and Scotland and then on the continent. Under such monks as Columba and Columbanus, they founded monasteries taught in Latin and Greek and authored secular and religious works. Now we are entering into the discussion of monasticism. The early Middle Ages witnessed the rise of monasticism in the West. The shape of European monasticism was determined by traditions and ideas that originated with the desert fathers of Egypt and Syria. Most European monasteries were of the type that focuses on community experience of the spiritual life called Cenobitism, which was pioneered by Pachomius in the 4th century. Monastic ideals spread from Egypt to Western Europe in the 5th and 6th centuries through hagiographical literature such as the Life of Antony. Benedict of Nursia wrote the Benedictine rule for Western monasticism during the 6th century, detailing the administrative and spiritual responsibilities of a community of monks led by an abbot. Monks and monasteries had a deep effect on the religious and political life of the early Middle Ages, in various cases acting as land trusts for powerful families, centers of propaganda and royal support in newly conquered regions, and bases for missions and proselytization. They were the main and sometimes only outposts of education and literacy in a region. Many of the surviving manuscripts of the Latin classics were copied in monasteries in the early Middle Ages. Monks were also the authors of new works, including history, theology, and other subjects written by authors such as Bede, a native of northern England who wrote in the late 7th and early 8th centuries. Monastic reform became an important issue during the 11th century as elites began to worry that monks were not adhering to the rules binding them to a strictly religious life. Cluny Abbey, founded in the Macon region of France in 909, was established a part of the Cluniac Reforms, a larger movement of monastic reform in response to this fear. Cluny quickly established a reputation for austerity and rigor. It sought to maintain a high quality of spiritual life by placing itself under the protection of the papacy and by electing its own abbot without interference from laymen, thus maintaining economic and political independence from local lords. Monastic reform inspired change in the secular church. The ideals upon which it was based were brought to the papacy by Pope Leo IX and provided the ideology of clerical independence that led to the Investiture Controversy in the late 11th century. For details, see our video on Investiture Controversy. Click on the link at the top right corner. This involved Pope Gregory VII and Emperor Henry IV, who initially clashed over episcopal appointments, a dispute that turned into a battle over the ideas of investiture, clerical marriage, and simony. The emperor saw the protection of the church as one of his responsibilities, as well as wanting to preserve the right to appoint his own choices as bishops within his lands. But the papacy insisted on the church's independence from secular lords. These issues remained unsolved after the Compromise of 1122, known as the Concordat of Worms. The dispute represents a significant stage in the creation of a papal monarchy separate from and equal to lay authorities. It also had the permanent consequence of empowering German princes at the expense of the German emperors. The High Middle Ages was a period of great religious movements. Besides the Crusades and monastic reforms, people sought to participate in new forms of religious life. New monastic orders were founded, including the Carthusians and the Cistercians. The latter especially expanded rapidly in their early years under the guidance of Bernard of Clairvaux. These new orders were formed in response to the feeling of the laity that Benedictine monasticism no longer met the needs of the laymen, who, along with those wishing to enter the religious life, wanted a return to simpler hermetical monasticism of early Christianity or to live an apostolic life. Religious pilgrimages were encouraged. Old pilgrimage sites such as Rome, Jerusalem, and Compostela received increasing numbers of visitors, and new sites such as Monte Gargano and Bari rose to prominence. In the 13th century, mendicant orders, the Franciscans and the Dominicans, who swore vows of poverty and earned their living by begging, were approved by the papacy. Religious groups such as the Waldensians and the Humiliati also attempted to return to the life of early Christianity in the middle 12th and early 13th centuries, but they were condemned as heretical by the papacy. Others joined the Cathars, another heretical movement condemned by the papacy. In 1209, a crusade was preached against the Cathars, the Albigensian Crusade, which in combination with the medieval Inquisition eliminated them. This is the end of our today's discussion. Subscribe our channel, like our video and comment. Listen to our podcast episodes. Follow our official Facebook page, Twitter handle and Instagram. For any query, feel free to mail us. For details, see the description.